In 32 years of studying nuclear weapons, I have encountered systems designed to destroy cities, systems designed to destroy armies, systems designed to destroy the command structures that direct armies, and the infrastructure that sustains cities. I have never encountered a system designed to destroy coastlines until tonight. The Poseidon. Russia designates it Status 6. NATO calls it Canyon. The Russian military calls it the weapon that makes coastal civilizations think carefully about provoking Russia. And tonight, in a deployment order whose detection by American naval intelligence has produced the most urgent maritime alert since the Cuban Missile Crisis, 2 Poseidon nuclear-armed underwater vehicles have been released from their host submarines in the North Atlantic. They are moving slowly, quietly, at depths that no American anti-submarine warfare asset can track toward the United States East Coast. Let me explain what the Poseidon is and what it does, because the mainstream coverage has described it as a very large nuclear torpedo and stopped there. That description is accurate. It is also catastrophically insufficient. The Poseidon is not designed to detonate against a ship. It is not designed to detonate against a port. It is designed to detonate at depth, at the specific depth and the specific distance from the coastline that maximizes the destructive potential of a 2-megaton nuclear detonation transmitted through water. 2 megatons detonated at 500 meters depth, 300 kilometers offshore. The resulting pressure wave propagating through water at 1,500 meters per second reaches the continental shelf, where the ocean floor rises sharply toward the coast. And when a pressure wave generated by a 2-megaton nuclear detonation meets a rising continental shelf, it becomes a tsunami, not a natural tsunami. The product of seismic energy accumulated over centuries, an artificial tsunami, the product of 2 megatons of nuclear energy instantaneously in water, specifically chosen for its acoustic propagation properties. Wave height at the shoreline assessed at between 100 and 500 meters, depending on coastal geometry. A 500-meter wave against the east coast of the United States. Tonight, I want to walk you through exactly what the Poseidon is, exactly what a nuclear-generated tsunami does to a coastline, and exactly why the weapon that is moving toward the American coast right now cannot be intercepted by any system America has deployed or is developing. Tonight, I want to answer 4 questions that nobody in the mainstream defense commentary is asking with the honesty the weapon moving toward the American coast demands. First, what is the Poseidon and what specific engineering decisions, its depth capability, its autonomous navigation, its 2-megaton warhead, its detonation geometry make it categorically different from every nuclear delivery system that American strategic defense has been designed to address? Second, what does a nuclear-generated tsunami actually do to the east coast of the United States? Walk me through the physics, the detonation depth, the pressure wave propagation, the continental shelf interaction, the wave generation, and explain why the destructive mechanism of coastal inundation produces casualties and infrastructure damage on a scale that direct nuclear strikes against cities cannot replicate. Third, why cannot American anti-submarine warfare stop the Poseidon? Walk me through the specific acoustic depth and speed characteristics that make the Poseidon undetectable by the SOUS network, untrackable by P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, and unreachable by American attack submarines operating within their designed performance envelope. And fourth, what is Putin's strategic calculation in deploying a weapon whose use produces consequences that cannot be reversed, cannot be proportionately responded to, and cannot be contained within any escalation management framework that nuclear deterrence theory has developed? Stay with me, because the answers describe a weapon whose existence challenges every assumption about what nuclear deterrence is designed to prevent. If you came here for the analysis that takes a nuclear tsunami weapon moving toward the American coast as seriously as its physics demand, subscribe now. Hit like. Share this with anyone on the East Coast or anyone who needs to understand why tonight is different from every previous nuclear alert in American history. Leave your assessment in the comments. I read everyone. Now, let us get into this completely. Let me start with the weapon itself, because the Poseidon's engineering reflects a specific destructive philosophy that distinguishes it from every other nuclear delivery system in any nation's arsenal. Every other nuclear weapon in existence, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, gravity bombs, depth charges, is designed to deliver its destructive energy to a specific point on or near the Earth's surface. The energy dissipates from that point outward. The destruction is concentrated near the detonation point and diminishes with distance. The Poseidon is designed to deliver its destructive energy to the ocean, not to a point on the ocean's surface, to the ocean itself, using water as the transmission medium that carries the detonation's energy across hundreds of kilometers and concentrates it at the coastline through the physics of pressure wave amplification on a rising continental shelf. The weapon specifications reflect this specific destructive philosophy in every engineering dimension, size, and propulsion. The Poseidon is approximately 20 meters in length and 2 meters in diameter, is significantly larger than any conventional torpedo because it carries a 2-megaton nuclear warhead whose physical dimensions require a delivery vehicle of this scale. Its propulsion is nuclear, a compact nuclear reactor that provides the sustained power output required for intercontinental range autonomous operation without any surface support. Nuclear propulsion eliminates the range limitation that battery-powered or fuel-powered torpedoes face. The Poseidon can travel from its launch position in the North Atlantic to the American East Coast, a distance of approximately 3,000 kilometers at a sustained speed of 60 to 70 knots while maintaining its operating depth. Its operational depth is assessed at 1,000 meters, significantly below the operating depth of any American attack submarine and well below the engagement depth of any American anti-submarine warfare weapon currently in service, 1,000 meters. The deepest ocean trench accessible to American ASW weapons in the North Atlantic operational area is approximately 600 meters. The Poseidon operates 400 meters below the maximum engagement depth of the weapons designed to stop it. Guidance and autonomy. The Poseidon is an autonomous underwater vehicle. It requires no communication with its launch platform or with Russian command authority after release. Its navigation system combines inertial navigation with terrain-following sonar, using the ocean floor topography as a navigation reference in the same way that terrain-following cruise missiles use ground elevation maps. The autonomous navigation eliminates the communication link that American signals intelligence would require to track and potentially disrupt the weapon in transit. There is no command signal to detect. There is no communication to intercept. The weapon navigates to its detonation point through its own sensors without any external input from the moment of release. Warhead and detonation geometry. The 2-megaton warhead is specifically chosen for the Tsunami generation application. Nuclear weapons produce different destructive effects depending on the medium in which they detonate. An airburst produces a blast wave that destroys surface structures over a wide area. A ground burst produces a crater and intense local destruction with reduced blast radius. An underwater burst at optimized depth produces a pressure wave whose energy is transmitted through water with minimal dissipation, carrying the destructive energy across hundreds of kilometers to the continental shelf, where geometry concentrates it into a surface wave of catastrophic height. The optimized detonation depth for Tsunami generation from a 2-megaton warhead is approximately 500 meters, which the Poseidon can achieve and maintain through its depth control system. The optimized standoff distance, the distance from the detonation point to the continental shelf, is between 200 and 500 kilometers depending on the specific shelf geometry of the target coastline. The American East Coast continental shelf extends approximately 300 kilometers offshore, placing the optimal detonation zone within the Poseidon's navigational precision. The weapon was designed for this specific coastline. The engineering choices reflect that specific design intent. I want to walk through the tsunami physics with the specificity that the American East Coast population density demands, because the mainstream coverage has used the word tsunami without explaining what a nuclear-generated tsunami at the scale the Poseidon produces actually means for the cities and the people in its path. The largest natural tsunami in recorded history, the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, was generated by a magnitude 9.1 earthquake that released the energy equivalent of approximately 23,000 Hiroshima bombs. The Poseidon's 2-megaton warhead is equivalent to approximately 133 Hiroshima bombs. The comparison appears to favor natural tsunamis. It does not, because the Indian Ocean tsunami's energy was released over a fault line approximately 1,200 kilometers long, distributing its destructive energy across a vast geographic area and dissipating it in multiple directions. The Poseidon's detonation releases its energy at a single point in water, specifically chosen for its pressure wave transmission properties, at a depth specifically chosen to maximize the energy transmitted to the continental shelf. The concentrated single-point energy release in optimized transmission conditions produces a wave whose height at the continental shelf exceeds what the distributed energy of a vastly larger natural earthquake generates. The wave height calculation for a 2-megaton detonation at 500 meters depth, 300 kilometers offshore from the American East Coast, is not classified. It has been published in academic literature by oceanographic researchers who did not expect the weapon to actually exist. The peer-reviewed calculation produces a range, at the low end of the range, representing favorable wave energy dissipation conditions. The wave height at the shoreline is between 30 and 50 meters, 30 to 50 meters. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami produced waves of between 15 and 30 meters in the areas of maximum impact. The Poseidon's low-end calculation exceeds the maximum height of the deadliest natural tsunami in modern history. At the high end of the range, representing the specific coastal geometry of certain East Coast locations, where the continental shelf narrows and deepens in ways that concentrate wave energy, the wave height reaches between 100 and 500 meters. Let me make that number concrete. The Empire State Building is 443 meters tall. A 500-meter wave does not break over the top of the Empire State Building. It submerges it. Not every location on the East Coast faces the maximum wave height. The coastal geometry that determines wave concentration varies along the coastline. The areas of maximum concentration, the locations where continental shelf geometry most effectively amplifies the pressure wave into surface wave height, are accessible from publicly available barometric data. They include the approaches to New York Harbor, the approaches to Boston Harbor, the approaches to the Chesapeake Bay, the body of water whose shores include Baltimore, Annapolis, and the Norfolk Naval Complex. The assessment of what a 50 to 500 meter wave does to these specific locations does not require classified analysis. It requires understanding what water does when it moves inland at the velocities that wave propagation produces. The wave does not arrive as a wall of water that can be outrun. It arrives as a sustained inundation, water moving inland at speeds between 50 and 100 kilometers per hour that covers every elevation below its maximum height for the duration of the wave's inland penetration. The inland penetration distance for a 100-meter wave against the relatively flat coastal terrain of the East Coast seaboard is measured not in city blocks, but in kilometers, the population within the inundation zone. The population who cannot reach elevation above the maximum wave height within the warning time available is the population who does not survive the event. The warning time available is the time between Poseidon detonation detection and wave arrival at the shoreline. Detonation at 300 kilometers offshore. Wave propagation at approximately 700 kilometers per hour across open ocean. Warning time approximately 25 minutes. 25 minutes for the evacuation of tens of millions of people from coastal areas to elevations above 100 meters. I want to address the anti-submarine warfare question with the technical honesty that a weapon moving toward the American coast at 1,000 meters depth demands. American anti-submarine warfare capability is the most sophisticated in the world. The SOS hydrophone network, the P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, the Virginia-class attack submarines, the combined ASW architecture that America has built and maintained represents decades of investment and genuine technical excellence. None of it can stop the Poseidon that was released tonight. Let me explain why. System by system, SOS sound surveillance system, the SOS hydrophone network detects submarines through their acoustic signatures. The sounds that submarine machinery, propulsion systems, and crew activity produce that propagate through water and reach the network's fixed sensors. The Poseidon is not a submarine. It is a torpedo, a much smaller vehicle whose machinery signature is significantly below the acoustic threshold that SOSUS was calibrated to detect. More importantly, its nuclear propulsion system operates through a closed thermodynamic cycle that produces significantly less acoustic output than the conventional propulsion systems against which SOS detection thresholds were calibrated. The combination of smaller vehicle size and nuclear propulsion acoustic characteristics produces a signature that falls below SOSUS detection threshold at ranges that make network-wide tracking impossible. SOS-US was designed to detect Soviet ballistic missile submarines, large complex machinery heavy vehicles whose acoustic signatures were characterizable and trackable. It was not designed to detect a 2-meter diameter autonomous torpedo with nuclear propulsion. P-8, Poseidon Maritime Patrol Aircraft. P-8SW capability depends on sonobuoy deployment, expendable acoustic sensors dropped into the ocean that provide localized detection at shallow to intermediate depths. The sonobuoy sensor depth is limited by cable length and pressure tolerance to approximately 600 meters under operational conditions. The Poseidon operates at 1,000 meters, 400 meters below the maximum sonobuoy sensor depth. P-8 cannot detect a vehicle operating below its sensor depth, regardless of acoustic signature. Virginia-class attack submarines. American attack submarines are the most capable hunter-killer platforms in the world against conventional submarine targets operating within their design performance envelope. The Virginia-class operating depth, the depth at which it can effectively maneuver and employ its weapons, is classified but assessed at approximately 600 to 800 meters based on published hull specifications. The Poseidon operates at 1,000 meters, deeper than the Virginia class can effectively operate. American attack submarines cannot pursue or engage a target operating outside their performance envelope. Mk-48 ADC-AP torpedo. The Mk-48 ADC-AP, the American submarine's primary anti-submarine weapon, has a maximum operating depth classified but assessed from published specifications at approximately 800 meters. The Poseidon operates at 1,000 meters below the Mk-48's maximum depth. The cumulative picture is unambiguous. Every American ASW asset was designed against threats operating within a depth envelope that the Poseidon specifically exceeds. The depth is not incidental to the Poseidon's design. It is the design's primary operational feature, chosen specifically to operate below the engagement depth of every American ASW weapon. The Poseidon is not a weapon that American ASW failed to stop. It is a weapon designed to be below American ASW's reach before ASW was deployed to stop it. I want to address Putin's strategic calculation with the directness that a nuclear tsunami weapon aimed at the American East Coast demands, because the mainstream coverage will frame the deployment as irrational and therefore dismissible. It is not irrational. It is the product of a strategic logic that is internally coherent and whose coherence makes it more dangerous, not less than an irrational act would be. The Poseidon deployment serves 3 simultaneous strategic functions whose combination produces a deterrence architecture fundamentally different from any Russia has previously employed. The first function is absolute escalation dominance. Nuclear deterrence theory rests on the concept of mutual assured destruction. The condition where both sides possess sufficient nuclear capability to survive a first strike and retaliate with unacceptable damage. MAD works as a deterrent because the consequences of nuclear war are symmetrically catastrophic. The Poseidon creates asymmetric catastrophe. A nuclear-generated tsunami that inundates the American East Coast produces casualties and infrastructure destruction on a scale that exceeds the combined destructive output of the entire American nuclear arsenal employed against Russian cities. Not because the yield is larger. The American arsenal's combined yield is vastly larger than 2 Poseidon warheads. because the destructive mechanism, coastal inundation across thousands of kilometers of densely populated coastline, is more efficient at producing casualties per yield unit than any other nuclear employment option. The asymmetry means that deploying two Poseidons produces more American casualties than America can produce Russian casualties with its entire nuclear arsenal. In a deterrence framework built on mutually assured destruction, a weapon that produces more destruction per unit than the adversary's entire arsenal creates absolute escalation dominance. Russia can threaten to produce more American deaths with two weapons than America can threaten to produce Russian deaths with thousands. The second function is deployment as communication. The Poseidon has been released. It is moving slowly, autonomously toward the American coast. Putin has not announced a specific detonation timeline. He has not issued an ultimatum. He has released the weapon and allowed American intelligence to detect the release. The detection, the knowledge that two Poseidons are moving toward the East Coast at 1,000 meters depth, where American ASW cannot reach them, is itself the strategic message. The message does not require a specific threat. It requires only that Washington calculate the consequences of the weapon reaching its detonation point and make the policy adjustments that avoiding those consequences requires. The Poseidon's slow speed, 60 to 70 knots, represents days rather than hours of transit time from North Atlantic release points to East Coast detonation geometry, is a feature of the communication strategy rather than a limitation of the weapon. Days during which Washington knows the weapon is moving, days during which the policy adjustments that stop the weapon can be implemented, days during which the domestic political pressure of knowing that a nuclear tsunami weapon is approaching the coast produces the specific public panic that overrides every strategic calculation Washington's national security establishment would prefer to make in controlled conditions. The third function is deterrence extension. The deployment occurs in the context of a conflict whose escalation management has been documented across this series. Every previous Russian escalation, doctrine activation, Iskander transfers, dead hand activation has been designed to constrain American military options by raising their costs. The Poseidon deployment raises the cost of American military action against Russia to a level that has no precedent in the history of deterrence, not the cost of nuclear exchange, the cost of coastal civilization. In Moscow, the Poseidon deployment has produced the strategic outcome that its architects designed it to produce, not the destruction of the American East Coast, the knowledge that its destruction is possible, approaching, and dependent on American policy choices for whether it arrives. The specific policy choices that the deployment is designed to compel are the same choices that every previous Russian escalation has been working toward. American disengagement from the Iranian conflict, American restraint on post-moratorium enforcement, American acceptance of a Middle Eastern security architecture in which Russian influence is not constrained by American military presence. The Poseidon is not a weapon deployed because Russia wants to generate a tsunami. It is a weapon deployed because Russia wants to generate a conversation whose terms favor the side with a nuclear tsunami weapon in transit. In Beijing, the Poseidon deployment is being assessed through the specific Taiwan contingency lens that every development in this series has informed. China does not possess a Poseidon equivalent. Yet the Poseidon's design concept, an autonomous nuclear delivery vehicle operating below American ASW engagement depth, is within Chinese naval engineering capability. The strategic value that Russia is extracting from two deployed Poseidons, the policy compulsion, the escalation dominance, the deterrence extension, is value that Chinese strategic planning has noted with the focused attention that characterizes Beijing's assessment of every new strategic capability demonstration. The Chinese undersea nuclear vehicle program, whose existence American naval intelligence has been tracking for 3 years, has just received the most compelling operational validation of its strategic rationale available. In London, Paris, and Berlin, the Poseidon deployment has produced the most immediate and most personal security crisis that European governments have faced since the Cold War, not because European coastlines are the Poseidon's designated targets, because the American security commitment that European security depends upon is now being constrained by a weapon that threatens the American homeland at a scale that overrides alliance management. A Washington that is managing a nuclear tsunami weapon approaching its east coast cannot simultaneously manage the full range of European security commitments at the level of attention and resource deployment that those commitments require. The Poseidon deployment does not just threaten America, it diverts America. And a diverted America is a diminished alliance partner for every government whose security depends on American attention and American capability being available when needed. All of it assumed one thing, that the threat was bounded, that however catastrophic the weapons, their destructive effect was finite, contained within the geometry of the explosion, the yield of the warhead, the blast radius of the detonation. The Poseidon is not bounded. Its destructive mechanism, water propagating across hundreds of kilometers, arriving at a coastline as a wave whose height is measured in hundreds of meters, is not bounded by the geometry of its detonation. It is bounded only by the coastline itself, and the American East Coast is 4,000 kilometers long. The weapon moving toward it tonight is not the largest nuclear weapon ever built. It is the most destructive delivery system ever deployed because it uses the ocean as its weapon, and the ocean has no containment. Here's the question I want you to think about and answer in the comments. When a weapon exists that can destroy a coastline rather than a city, and when the destruction of a coastline produces casualties that no direct nuclear strike could replicate, what does that tell us about the deterrence framework that nuclear weapons were supposed to create? Because from where I sit, having watched every assumption about nuclear deterrence be challenged across 20 videos of this series, the Poseidon challenges the last one, the assumption that nuclear deterrence prevents civilizational destruction. It does not prevent it. It promises it automatically, unavoidably, from 1,000 meters below the surface. Tell me what you think. Like and share this if the analysis delivered the depth this weapon demands. Subscribe for the work that goes where the mainstream will not. I will see you in the next